back to Malachi's Message YouTube channel. I am Emily Rochelle. I'm the co-founder of Malachi's Message. Today, co-hosting is one of my favorite people. It's Cristina Greenfield. And we are introducing Megan Carson today. She is the founder of The Guided Well, and she's also a mold survivor. So she's here to tell us a little bit about her story, who she is, what she does. So we'll just jump right in. Megan, hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and honor to be able to talk about something that I am so passionate about.
Glad to have you.
Yeah.
So you're a mold survivor, and I visited your Instagram account, and I love a lot of the information that you're putting out there. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? Like, what did you go through? I'm sure that had a lot to do with what you're doing today. Can you tell us about what you went through?
Sure. So, my mold journey kind of became really apparent in February of 2021, when I became really direly ill, with, over 40 symptoms. I was in and out of the hospital, accruing, more and more diagnoses as the months and weeks went on. And, no one really had answers as to why. Hindsight now is 2020, because I realized that, I grew up in flood damaged homes. I had all of the symptoms that, most children who are in mold generally deal with, including, what would be diagnostically criteria appropriate PANS pandas as I was growing up. I had chronic sinus infections, strep throat, bronchitis, things like that, all that kind of makes sense. Once I moved out of that house, I certainly, that was after college, had, a reduction in symptoms and kind of thought maybe I grew out of it, and I know that's common with a lot of people, kind of in hindsight, connecting the dots where you realize, you were sicker when you were in certain homes and certain environments. So this last mold exposure that I had in my last home, I was living there for about a year prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic, like most of us, shut us into our homes. And I unfortunately was shut into a very, very sick home. And it kind of, my symptoms definitely started being kicked off right away, with, varying escalations month over month, come to February 2021, where I had been starting to suspect mold for probably 6 to 9 months prior to that, due to other research. And again, coming up short with doctors who told me, we're not sure why this is happening. This is your new life now. You're just going to have to manage these various symptoms and syndromes that I was again accruing. And one day in February, I kind of said to my fiance, now husband, I just feel like it's this house. I have to get out of here. You can come or not. I don't care. At that point, I had no testing validation, but I felt it. And sure enough, and now I had made him look, multiple times through this condo or through this townhouse for visible mold. There was none, which I think is another common theme in these stories of people who are reluctant to believe that mold is a root cause for them or a problem because they're not seeing anything.
Yeah.
So again, it came full circle, after I left and a few weeks after we got the ERMI and inspection, which, solidified that we had, super high levels. We were renting. So we did ultimately break our lease. And we're in temporary housing for 5 weeks and, ultimately found other housing. But I mean, by that time I was incredibly ill. I couldn't keep my electrolytes stable. I had severe mast cell activation syndrome, was going into anaphylactic, episodes, just from foods that I had eaten, for years. And again, no one really understood that. No one could tell me why, out of nowhere, I was having throat closures, and that constellation of symptoms. So it was very scary, but ultimately, I am so glad I listened to my intuition and whatever was telling me internally to kind of get out, even without having that data metric, at the point where I decided to leave.
Yeah.
That gut instinct is like never wrong.
Never. And, it's crazy. And I don't talk about this often, but, psychiatric issues, are quite common, in mold. And I would have these, I would hear this voice, get out, get out, get out. And I couldn't explain why. My track also for the last 3 months in the house became more and more psychologically and psychiatric in nature. I started having extreme insomnia, extreme anxiety, depression, depressive thoughts, even some hallucinations. And all of this, was ascribed to a mental break at, the age of 31 with no previous real history of any mental health issues. So, initially when I was hearing get out and hearing these things, it was like, wow, maybe, I really am losing my mind. But really that was, this innate knowing, telling me to get out of my home.
Wow. That's incredible. That gives me chills that you're able to maintain that connection with your intuition, through everything that you were going through. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, dealing with the medical system, you're taught to ignore it. I was taught for so long from, even a young age when I was having a lot of these symptoms that are consistent with mold illness, mold toxicity, that, it's just allergies, you'll grow out of it. It's just asthma. Take the pill, do this. And, this is it. This is what you're going to deal with, whether it resolves or not. And there's no driver.
Yeah.
And that is just such a disservice to patients. And being out of touch with their intuition is so common dealing with a mold toxicity, mold illness journey, and reclaiming that has been really powerful for me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's
no words for that.
You're a practitioner as well, aren't you, Megan?
I am. So again, in my quest to figure out what was going on, I started, voraciously researching. One thing I will say that was a positive in this constant fight or flight was probably the adrenaline that kept me able to consume information and retain it. I know a lot of people deal with things like brain fog and, memory recall issues for, again, whatever reason. I can only think biochemically due to what was going on. I was able to research and ultimately certify as an IHP, integrative health practitioner, and also through FDN, functional diagnostic nutrition, to kind of get those answers. Now, they didn't completely, solve my case, but they were incredibly helpful. And for me figuring out, what pathways might be impacted. And then it certainly lit a fire under me to start helping others who are dealing with this now that, I have a working knowledge of how mold and its insidious nature can affect, so many organ systems and body parts.
Oh.
I'm curious, did you get yourself better, or did you work with a doctor, or how are you today? How are you feeling?
That's a great question. So initially I had worked with a doctor who kind of billed himself as a mold specialist. He completely, unfortunately, missed my mast cell activation syndrome, which, if you are at all familiar, often people, as I mentioned, I have anaphylaxis. So a lot of people have tolerance issues to supplements, medications, sometimes even things like water, food. So And I see this commonly, and this is another thing I'm passionate about that I see a lot of well-meaning doctors and practitioners miss is that stabilization aspect and really assessing if things like mast cell are at play before engaging in certain treatments. So that unfortunately set me back a little bit because I did, when you're desperate, you're willing to do anything anyone tells you, especially when they're in a position of authority and something that you're, trying to amass knowledge on. So unfortunately, that made me a little worse. And then I really, again, went back to the research and back to listening to lectures, listening to webinars, reading Dr. Neil Nathan's book, Toxic, reading Dr. Jill's book, Break the Mold, and just arming myself with information to kind of put the pieces together for myself. And ultimately, I would say that was 70% of it. I did ultimately, and I absolutely stabilized myself with mast cell activation and figured out the right cocktail for me. I was unable to do any pharmaceuticals even that do help stabilize mast cell, like ketotifen or cromolyn. So that wasn't an option for me, even if they were prescribed, which they weren't. But that mast cell piece was really big. And then I was able to start working with a practitioner who helped me rid myself of a really nasty parasitic infection that I had due to the immune suppression. That again, no doctor had mentioned could be at play. And honestly, that first 1 to 3 months of parasite cleansing was so brutal. But even after that, I had such a meaningful gain in how I was feeling. I knew I was on the right track. And that was really, really helpful for me. And then going on, I just figured out kind of, again, the right things to help detox everything that was in my body and replenish and replete the things that were so depleted due to the exposure and the progression of my illness.
I think just listening to you talk, and Megan and I had connected on Instagram, and we've been messaging each other, and I think I had a real connection with her just in the things that we've discussed, and obviously talking about our experience and stuff. But this is the first time I've actually gotten to talk to her and see her face. So, but just listening to you speak, I'm thinking, you so appropriately named your new venture, your company, The Guided Well, because part of something that I'm very passionate about as well is research and knowing, like, what are you, not relying on any one individual doctor or, person of authority, but knowing for myself, what is the baseline? How are things supposed to happen? And even in connecting with other people, like other people message me on Instagram and they ask me, lots of different questions, and ultimately they're looking for the answer. Like, what do I do? Just tell me what to do, and always I feel like guiding is so appropriate, not telling, not prescribing, but guiding is so appropriate, because every single person's journey has many commonalities. A lot of the things that you mentioned with, kind of gaslighting in the medical community, this progression of one symptom being looked at and thrown a prescription at, and, in order to silence what all the alarms that your body is telling you, what's going on. But so much of that is common. It's so common for people not to even consider their environment and how that impacts them as individuals mentally or physically or, biochemically. I don't know if that's the right term, but I heard you say it. It sounded good. So much of that is common. And I remember distinctly, I'll always remember wanting someone to just tell me what to do. Like, just tell me what to do. One of the things that you want, like I said, to tell you what to do, but then you also want somebody to tell you that, like, they've been there before and it's real, and I say this almost every time we talk about it, but Emily was that person for me. She just listened, and she validated that what we were going through was real. I had absolutely no connection to my intuition. So that's one piece that I'm just like, wow, Megan, like, that's incredible that you grew up in a water damage building. You could have been one of those people that was just, this is my baseline. This is it. This is, because that's all you knew. And so I think that's so incredible. And then your intuition probably guided you to, to build the company that you're building and to offer the services that you're offering, because people need guidance. They need guidance. And unfortunately they want answers, but no one person is in any position to give anybody the full answer. It's like, these are different things that you can try, but we're going to have to, there's some trial and error involved, and there's a whole lot of customization involved for every single person's journey. And I don't think I've ever heard somebody who's been through mold not describe it as a journey, because it's like when we were first going through it, we were like, we thought about it as like the beginning, the middle, and the end, and now we're like, no, it's not really an end. It's a lifestyle change. It's a new life.
It is. And you can't ever go back. You can't. And I mean, you can't not know what you know now.
Yeah.
Know better, do better, but it almost can make it harder, right? I mean,
yeah,
I've been personally, so I mentioned I was in temporary housing, and we ended up in a building, a new build, directly after that 5 weeks. And within 2 weeks, water was pouring through our master bedroom window. They had actually improperly flashed the entire side of our building, which of course made me incredibly alarmed, paranoid, et cetera. I was already in a really spun out state due to my previous experience. But how I was able to even drive that and have them, dry it out properly, and really do it to a level that I felt was appropriate, that I wouldn't have known before. They wouldn't have done it had I asked, and we saw 15 rentals before that again, once the signs to look for and the signs of a sick building, you can't ignore them.
And it can be kind of burdensome, like in the middle, when you're first learning about it. I don't know if you felt this way, but I remember feeling very like resentful of the fact that we had to know this, that we couldn't just walk into any pretty shiny new house and be excited about the opportunity to live there, but as your journey progresses, your mindset changes and you become thankful for it, because reality, it's a sick building,
Totally. And yeah, I mean, I connect with that a lot, because, and I mean, sometimes I still feel it, to be honest. We've been looking for a house for over a year now, due to various factors. We just haven't been able to find anything, and we're not, willing to settle and compromise on the things that we now know. So it can be, a challenge, but I mean, I think there are solutions to every challenge, and that's kind of that's a real platform I like to stand on too, because I think hope in this space is really important. It can feel really hopeless, especially when you're finding out that mold could be an issue or is your issue in your home, and you're sick, your spouse is sick, your kids are sick. You have to think about getting rid of some of your belongings, and leaving. It is dark. But guiding people through that in a really hopeful and optimistic way is something that, I take pride in doing, and is something that's really important to me, because you can get to the other side. You just have to believe you can get to the other side.
Yeah, I think that's a very important message.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, like, how do you take care of yourself when you're guiding people? Because I wondered this about Emily as well, actually, because I think she guides so many people the way that she did for me, a couple of years ago. And I think it must be so incredibly hard, because it takes you back almost to the very first time that you knew, for yourself. It takes you all the way back there with all those emotions as you're kind of walking this journey with the people that you're helping. How do you take care of yourself?
What a great question. And honestly, it's something I'm still learning, having boundaries and kind of offering information that's, separate from my own experience, can be difficult at times. Some clients cases are really similar to mine, and I see the similarities. And as you pointed out, it can be triggering and it can bring you back. But, I try to remain as unbiased as partial or as possible, and just give them the facts and information, while being supportive. And again, offering that piece of hope, but really staying grounded is something I work on daily, especially after consults, specifically consults that are, really heartbreaking or difficult. But, it's my passion to help people. I get so much fulfillment and joy out of knowing that these people are a little less scared, a little less feeling.
I think you're frozen. Oh, you're unfrozen now.
Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, you froze for like a few seconds.
Okay.
So you help guide people, and I guess through their situation. Where do you see some like gaps in the industry that you kind of, help them with? Like, what are some of the big gaps to you?
Sure. I mean, great question. There are so many, pitfalls along this journey, or there can be, on both the home and body side. I mean, on the home side, even people who get to the conclusion that mold might be an issue and realize that I need an inspection. And then, you realize, or can come to realize, that all inspectors are not created equal, and inspection is not really well regulated for mold. And you can have varying results based on, what inspector comes to you. A lot of people will just do air sampling. And, as we probably know, that is generally, not enough, not sufficient to diagnose a home with, a mold problem. A comprehensive sampling plan with other sampling techniques such as surface sampling, whether that's swab or tape lift, sometimes ERMI, wall agitation sampling. I mean, all of that makes a good, that sampling plan, is the foundation of having a good inspection, in addition to having somebody look over, all of the systems of your home. And most people, again, unfortunately, when they're going down this road, don't know that. And so they don't get that. They're just getting someone in there who maybe took, a weekend course and is certified in mold inspection. And honestly, it usually comes back giving them a false sense of security and invalidating their intuition, that they have a mold problem. So that's one. And then, I mean, it just rolls into everything else, so that's the big one, where I start, because most people either come to me having had, multiple inspections. And then I look through, the inspections, and it's just, sadly so incomplete and inferior in terms of the service they've gotten to conclude that they don't have a problem. That, I help guide them and educate them on what an inspection should look like, what questions you should be asking an inspector, to make sure that you get the information and data that you need to make informed choices. Because all of this, you want to be making the most informed choices that you can, whether that's through the inspection. If you've had a great inspection, then comes remediation, usually, or you have a choice to, remediate or move. I often help clients there too. And that case to case is very different. Some people think, oh my God, we have to move, we have to leave everything behind. And sometimes that's indicated based on, findings and client symptoms. And sometimes, it's not, and remediation could be a great outcome. But then again, that next stumbling block on how to vet and properly, find a good remediation team and a good remediator is the next step. And having a guide all along these points is just really helpful, because as again, I mentioned a lot of brain fog, a lot of cognition issues are involved in this. We're so, in addition to just being overwhelmed with the situation, there is impaction from what you're actually, breathing in, whether it be, the mold spore or mycotoxin. So again, just having a guide is what I wish I had. And that's ultimately why I offer the services I do. And it's throughout the entire process, or it can be, if that's what the client needs.
Yeah.
I have a question. What does a good inspection to you look like? And what are some questions that you would tell your clients to ask the inspector to make sure they have a good inspector?
Sure. So, number one, a thorough home inspection is outside and inside. A home inspector should be doing an outside exterior perimeter walk and checking on, cladding, which is the outside siding of your home to make sure there are no penetration points, looking at if there are any grading or drainage issues on the home and on your lot that could be contributing to water coming from the inside from the exterior into the interior. And then inside, which most people don't know includes attic and basement spaces. A thorough inspection will include all the spaces of your home that are readily accessible. Basements and attics both have great interplay in terms of how they can interact with our main living space. Through the stack effect, you're getting air from both of those spaces. So it's important to check those areas. And in terms of inspection and investigation, the HVAC system, the lungs of our home is often a big point of contamination. So having that inspected as part of a overarching comprehensive inspection is really important too. And then the sampling plan, again, comes from the inspector's visual inspection saying, this is an area of high risk. I'd like to test it. This is what I propose, based on what I'm seeing. Should we do a wall cavity sample? Because we know there was a leak from above that could be, in your wall behind that we may not be able to visibly see. Some of that can be detected through moisture meters or infrared cameras, which is also what I like to see inspectors use as tools in their toolbox. Those are minimum requirements for me. Anything extra is great. I'm all about new technology, but hitting those basics of, getting a good visual inspection outside, inside, and in all the spaces, including HVAC, and then a comprehensive sampling plan based on and predicated on what that inspector's finding is number one. So often a good screening question just to ask up front is, how long does a general inspection take? And if someone says 30 minutes, an hour, without even asking you your square footage, that's a huge red flag. Thorough inspections take hours. And again, that depends on the size of your home, but a minimum of 2 hours, in my opinion, is, so if somebody goes under that, that's again, a red flag and something to ask further questions on. I would also ask, again, what sampling methods they use. Are they just using air samples, ambient air samples, which is, taking air samples usually in the middle of a room for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And then that is the air and dust accumulates on a slide that's then sent out and looked at. And I think Brian Carr of Mold Finders says 70% of the time, these metrics miss a source area, even if it's less than 10 feet away. So, and that's if you're relatively close. So if you're putting one of these devices in the middle of a room, which is, statistically speaking, the least likely area to be impacted because it's not near any walls or generally anything, your odds of finding anything are even lower. And again, that plays into then the false sense of security when you get these results back saying we didn't find anything. So that would be the second question I ask, what testing they use. Again, I really like moisture mapping with moisture meters, but even if they're just using the moisture meter to test areas that have been impacted recently, that have been wet, that's a bare minimum.
Yeah. I think it's also important for people to just to understand how mold works, so if you've got an inspector who's like, what kind of moisture meter are they using, first of all, but if they're just kind of swiping areas and they're, wet areas, bathrooms or whatever, or, they're like, tell me, do you know if there's a leak? Okay, I'm going to swipe this area. It could be dry, but there could be mold there, and some people, they just, first of all, they don't understand the tools or what the tools are looking for. And then secondly, they don't understand mold and moisture and how that, how moisture or condensation, even not an active leak, but it could just be, water vapor trapped in certain areas of things. They don't understand that, which I didn't understand that 2 years ago. So I'm not saying like people are not smart. We just don't think about it. We don't have to know that usually in our day-to-day life. We should. I know that now, but it's not something that generally people understand. And so just having that just general understanding of what is each tool supposed to do. Okay, now I can understand a little bit better how it should be used and to what extent it should be used. And, maybe doing a moisture meter on one wall, is not enough. Maybe I need to get back there in the cavity and look and see what's going on. It's not enough, but you're in such a frantic state when you've gotten to the point where you're calling an inspector into your home and you're thinking, okay, maybe we're all sick because there's mold here somewhere that I can't see or smell. You're in such a confused and frantic state that you're not really thinking all those things through. You're just like, I'm going to hire somebody, an expert, and the expert's going to come in and they're going to do whatever they do, and then we're going to get results and then we'll figure out where to go from there. But that part about what do they do and how do they do it, that's so important. And
I think another thing that I neglected to say is the pre-inspection talk, whether that be over the phone or, on site. This inspector should be asking you, have you had any active or known leaks or past leaks? Because that, like you said, and you had a great point where, moisture meters will not detect, a spot that was wet 3 months ago that may have already dried, which could still be very much a problem, but their tool isn't picking it up. So having someone who's skilled to put all those pieces together to say, it's dry, but why don't we take a wall cavity sample just to be sure that nothing's back there, knowing the history, it is really important, as you touched on.
Yeah. There's so many different considerations, and the details are so important. But I remember when we were going through it, it was Christmas. It was about this time. December's always a weird time for me. So it was about this time, a few years ago, and our doctor, gave it. We did the ERMI, and then our doctor told us that my daughter was very sick, and I was like, I don't understand this ERMI. I don't know what this means, and then my kid is sick and somehow there's a correlation, and I just thought she was autistic. That's what they told me 2 years ago, and so it's all very confusing. And I remember trying to get a hold of my doctor because I was like, what are you saying? What are you saying? Because she was the one that was kind of like putting it together. And I was like, I don't understand what this means. And then she directed me to a different consultant who I was like trying to get a hold of. And of course it's almost Christmas, so she's like doing Christmas with her family. And I'm getting so progressively frustrated as I'm like sitting in this house that somebody's told me is, killing us, trying to get a hold of this person. And I was just like, I don't understand if this is such a problem, where is the urgency from all these different people, and it didn't feel like there was any urgency. So then it was like, can this really be that big of a problem? It's just, I just remember that day like it was yesterday. It was just such a very confusing time, because there's the point where there's no urgency from anybody because they're all like, we'll get to you when we get to you. And then there's a point where like you figuring out that insurance doesn't cover any of this. So then you're like, can this really, even if insurance doesn't cover this, how is this legitimately this big of an issue? It's just all these inputs that are just like, if you have any intuition left, it's like taking it all down. It's it's a guidance is so key, and having and being able to walk through the entirety of the process with somebody. I can see how that could have been incredibly helpful for us at the time, because we were full of questions with very little answers.
I'm sure. And then there's so much crossover, like you're saying, you're referred out just like you would be with, a regular doctor and a specialist. You have your doctor who may or may not be somewhat familiar with mold. They're ordering a mycotoxin test. Again, that validates you have high levels, right? And you have a problem, but they're not going to be able to tell you what to do with your house or how to attack that issue, or what your home test results mean. So that is the gap that I talk about too, that I try to help fill as well, because people who are dealing with the home and then realizing that they have a body issue as well, or people dealing with body issues who then realize their home is making them sick. There's not a lot of talk between those two sectors.
Yeah.
And a lot of doctors, unfortunately, even the mold literate ones, can give bad house advice sometimes.
Yeah.
So, I saw that again and contended with it, and it was so frustrating. And I know, you just said you did too. And again, that is certainly why Guided Well was born, because it is just like banging your head against the wall, trying to put these puzzle pieces together.
Yeah. And I think the other confusing piece is that there are many well-meaning people who are probably fine at their job, and I'm thinking specifically about like HVAC professionals, because I remember that was one piece that, okay, now that we know that our mold issue primarily was in the HVAC, and so, okay, off we go trying to find somebody to, replace this. And I remember talking to people, and they were like, oh yeah, I've heard of people getting sick, but I've never experienced it, and I see mold in the HVACs all the time, and so are you sure this is really the issue? And I'm like, I'm not sure of anything right now. Like, I know nothing, and so it's so important to understand, to find professionals who understand that mold can make you sick, and that it does make you sick, because there are many well-meaning people who are nice people who do their job just fine, and are able to maintain their licenses and all that kind of thing. They do what they're supposed to do. But if they don't understand your particular needs, then they might not be the professional for you, and I think that's across the board. I also remember calling inspectors, and all I knew is that they needed to be licensed. So I go to the website, and find the licensing website, and I literally just start calling people. And I'm explaining, okay, we did an ERMI, but they're like, why do you think you have a mold problem? Oh, we did an ERMI, and these are results. And I remember the first probably 5 were like, oh, well, ERMIs, you got to be really careful with that. I mean, you could have done it wrong, and we will come in and we'll do air samples, and we'll make sure that we do it right, because we know what we're doing. And so you get like 5 people who are telling you that you probably did a test that they don't believe has any validity, but your doctor is saying it's the Bible. You're just like, who do I believe? And my husband even didn't believe the doctor at that point, because he was like, now she wants us to take all these supplements, and what is she getting out of this, and why is she telling us that we need to do all this? Like, he was very suspicious of the doctor, and we did ask her. We were like, do you have some like stake in the supplement company? Because we were just so confused. We're like, what do you have? Like, what interest do you have in turning our life upside down?
Yeah.
It's just confusing. Such a very, very confusing time.
It is.
Well, the industry in a whole is just, it's all over the place. And, Texas is one of a few that actually regulates the industry, and inspectors can be held liable. Yep. So they have to carry liability insurance, because they can be sued if they do things wrong, if they give bad advice that leads to injury to somebody. So we always have to steer on the utmost side of caution here in Texas, because if we don't, then somebody can come after us. Like, I had this mom once I own Texas Mold Inspectors, in case people don't know that. So this is one scenario that I'll throw out there. I had this mom once ask me about her Tempur-Pedic mattress. She was like, it's only been in the environment for 3 months. They just bought it, $5,000. She didn't want to throw it away. And I was like, look, I have to tell you, you have to discard it. It's been in that environment for 90 days, being contaminated over and over every single day. You were all sick, very sick. So I can't say that you can take that safely to a new environment. And then about 6 months later, I get a call from her and she was like, you were right. Every time my daughter slept on our mattress, she ended up in the ER with an asthma attack. Right.
Oh my gosh.
So if I had told her, yeah, it's only been 3 months, you can take it, that phone call would have been completely different from that mom.
Yeah.
And, everybody's situation also is differently financially when they're going through mold. And so one of the biggest things that I think is you have to have a good inspector. The assessment is the most critical and important part of the entire process. If you have a good inspector, then they can find and identify where all the mold growth is, as well as the source of moisture. Sampling is secondary, in my opinion, because sampling is just going to tell you whatever you captured in that sample. You still know there's mold there and it needs to be remediated and the source of moisture has to be fixed, right?
Absolutely.
So sampling costs extra money. And a lot of inspectors like to use, well, we got a sample here, because that's going to run up the tab and they're going to make a lot more money. But if you have a good inspector, and depending on the situation, like if you're going against a landlord, obviously you're going to need analytical data. But if it's a home that you own, and let's say you have medical testing, you know what you're being affected by, you've done an ERMI maybe too, then you just need the inspector really to go in there and find it and find the sources. So that's just my opinion.
No, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. What I have seen and why I do like seeing sampling is, in a few cases where species on the ERMI, for instance, that were elevated 100 or 1,000 times over control, were not, it was never found in the inspection, right? So, and they did a full inspection, but I believe I forget what the exact even genus was, but ultimately, I mean, to me, that indicated there was a missed source because the testing from the ERMI showed they had, this elevated level, but it was, and again, this was someone who was coming to me already with an inspection, saying, that they had found source areas, but they hadn't found this specific mold in a high level that was on the ERMI that was not found in inspection testing, right? So in those sorts of cases, it's important. But I mean, that's a great point in terms of price point. If you have a great inspector who can identify all the sources without needing that validation, great. I mean, I'm all for that for sure. I mean, mold journeys are so incredibly financially burdensome. And that's what I love about Malachi's message, offering, financial assistance to families. I mean, I think that's incredible. And what a gift that is for, the hardship that so many families have to go through during this journey.
Yeah, it's, I deal with a lot of inspectors in different states too, because I get a lot of clients that call me and they send me the reports and I look through it, just like Megan, I know you do as well. And you look through it and you just get so disappointed because you're like, this person didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They just walked in and did sampling. Sampling is just guessing, hoping that something is going to show positive. And if it does show positive, okay, so where is it, right? The most important part is to find it, and you have a good inspector to find it. But the problem, in my opinion, in this industry is that nobody's being taught how to properly investigate and assess a home. Even the ICRC, they have good information and so forth. Even the training that you have to go to here in Texas, you go and you learn all this information, but nobody teaches them to even how to operate and use their tools, which tools you need to have. Right. And how you should go in and assess. There's no set protocol. So like you said, Megan, I agree with you. Everybody's different. And you're going to have a different outcome, with pretty much any inspector that you have, because there's no set protocol. And it's terrible because it is costly and people are sick. And whenever you are in a situation where you've had 2 or 3 inspections, and I love that you said that your fiance, now husband, because, you know, a lot of people, when they go through that situation like you did, Megan, you know, it puts a lot of hardship on the relationship, because if your spouse or your other one isn't, you know, being affected and you were spending all this money and the doctors can't figure it out, right? They're gaslighting you, or they just don't know. Then it can cause people to separate. And when you have other inspectors saying everything's fine because they're not investigating properly, then
they validate the spouse who believes, yeah, I mean, we nearly didn't make it. And I mean, I often talk about this with clients or people who reach out to me on Instagram, talking about the relationship or relational hardships that come from this too. I mean, my fiance at the time could not, you know, he obviously could see that the environment was making me sick and that I was having better outcomes in a different environment, but he couldn't understand why we had to get rid of all of our belongings.
Yeah.
He is very sentimental, and obviously, you know, financially had put a lot into furnishing our home. We had just moved there about a year and a half before, and, you know, fought with me tooth and nail on, you know, what we had to discard, even decontamination protocols that I needed him to undergo when he was going to our storage unit or going back and forth from our temporary housing or new housing to the old house to deal with everything, because I couldn't even step foot in there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably a 9 months of really working through that. And I mean, we went to couples counseling, and that's a whole nother layer, because, you know, most therapists have no idea, you know, the toll that mold can take. And we weren't able to find, you know, a specific provider who had that knowledge. So then they're kind of working outside their scope too, and don't really have a gauge on what's normal and what's not. You know, I think in some ways these therapists we saw thought I was crazy for saying we had to get rid of, you know, all of our stuff. But
Yeah.
Ultimately he met me there, though again, resentful, but we were able to work through the resent. And again, I think now seeing me go from, you know, unable to leave my bed to running a business, and what we've done, how that helped me get here, you know, it's undeniable for him. And that's often what I tell people too. It's like, it's really hard to have foresight or look at the future when you're in this, you know. Sometimes spouses need to see their partner leave the environment and get better for them to really believe it. And that's a really sad but true truth.
Yeah.
I see it time and time again, you know, they don't believe it. And like I touched on, I don't know if you caught it, but I told my fiance, I'm leaving with or without you. You know, you can come or not. I don't care. I have to leave.
Yeah.
So I made that decision for me. He ultimately decided to come. But then again, through every step of the way, it was, do we really, you know, are you sure we have to leave? Can we let the landlord fix it? Which was an absolute no for me. But he was even willing to potentially go down that route. And that caused friction. So it's brutal, you know, in every aspect.
It is. It absolutely is. I've had several people who've contacted me, and it's almost, the question is not exactly this, but I think this is what they're getting at. They're like, how did you convince your husband? Like, how did you get him to do what you wanted to do? You know, leave everything, or, you know, whatever. And ultimately I'm like, I don't have any good advice, because he just did it. Like, he just did it. But, you know, we have a little bit of a different situation, and he's just he was just willing to go along with it. And that was like, I really think it was like a parting of the clouds. I think God had a hand in it, because at that time we were fighting about everything. Like, we couldn't agree on dinner, you know, we didn't agree on anything. And I remember, like, 6 months after we went through all of that, we were out, we saw Josh, and the first thing that Josh said, he was like, "You're still married." And we were both like, yeah, I guess we are, you know. But it's so difficult. And both he and I, we knew that my oldest daughter was very sick. We didn't know that any of the rest of us were sick, but we've all subsequently been diagnosed with SIRS and you know, and different co-infections and all that kind of stuff. But still with my husband, he's like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I'm constantly taking his blood work out and being like, you're not. Like, you have not felt fine for a long time and you don't know what feeling fine is, but you're not. We're not there yet. You know, we're still healing and you also have to heal. Although he believes that he's like Superman or something, which I don't want to take that from him. If you listen to this, honey, you are Superman, but you still need to take your supplements.
I actually told Josh, like, I was like, do you want a divorce? Like when he came back inside because he didn't take his supplements, I was just like, you have to take your supplements. Josh is my husband. And you know, honestly, he was already talking about divorce when we were going through our mold journey. Yeah. And literally, you know, thanks to God, he finally got impacted on a level, you know, health wise, where, you know, he then realized that everything I had been telling him, you know, about what was, you know, how I was feeling, how sick I was, that I was, you know, that I was actually not lying, you know, because now all of a sudden he was having all of these health issues. So
I'm just now getting mine to detox and to go through, you know, protocols.
Really?
That it's taken this long. And I think, again, having me as a counterpoint where like I'm now feeling healthier than he's feeling, I think that's a good juxtaposition too, to get him saying like, why am I still feeling, you know, this persistent, you know, I never wake up feeling refreshed. I'm still having trouble sleeping, you know, I'm still clearing my throat and having histamine issues often, you know, and why? And every time he asks me why, it's because we were really impacted by mold and you haven't done anything about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, then really you're another bad exposure away from all of those cards falling, you know? And, so finally he's there, but I mean, yeah, I hear it day in and day out. And just like Emily said, why I find it so important to have a guide, especially when you are suspecting mold and are kind of unsure what to do. You're like, I know I need an inspection. It's just that, because you get a metric of validation for this other person in your life that shores up their point that you know, nothing's wrong, you're fine. And you have, again, an authority figure telling you you're not, because the doctors are already probably validating that by saying, you know, nothing's wrong, or you have hypothyroidism, or, you know, the litany of diagnoses that come with this that are normal. And then you have a home inspector, a mold inspector saying your home's fine. And that can really be detrimental. It's really hard to push further after that, especially for moms. You know, a lot of women come to me saying, you know, until my daughter or son came into the picture, you know, we were fine living with migraines and, you know, just a lower quality of life. And then they see their child sick, and the moms specifically are like, we have to do something. You know, I just feel like it's mold. And my husband just doesn't believe me. He doesn't think that this could be. Yeah. And that's, again, just, we're like, okay, we really have to make sure we get this high level inspection, again, to see, because again, when they think it is, I would say 99% of the time it is, you know, but to validate that and allow the other person to have a data point and metric to show them, you know, like, this is something, you know, we need to pursue this.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with our conversation. I hurt my neck earlier playing with my 19-month-old, but if you see me like moving around, it's because it's hurting. I don't know if you've gotten this pushback yet, Megan, but do mold inspectors like you?
Not really. I often, part of my consultation is I send a follow-up summary, and I have a full home health intake. I talk about, asking the age of the home. Have there been any renovations? What were the disclosures when you bought the home? A 40-page questionnaire. And then if they have floor plans, we go through room by room, with what's happened, whether there was a leak or, there's X, Y, and Z, right? So then I make a list of areas that I deem, high risk or high probability of potentially having a mold issue. And I always give that to them. And then clients will usually pass it on to the mold inspector. And then I'll see the inspection results. They haven't investigated any or even a quarter of, what we've deemed should be at least investigated. And I ask, well, did they go into that room? Did they, again, with whatever testing tool metric is appropriate, did they investigate it at the least, whether they took samples or not? And often it's no, and that's crazy. And goes back to, again, your point of, people aren't really being taught how to inspect and investigate.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
And then I think, Emily, that's a great question of do mold inspectors like you? Because I think there's even between remediation companies and between inspectors, it's so difficult to get, to just rely on any one of those to give you a straight answer about another. First of all, there's conflict of interest issues, but secondly, there could be really, really good, thorough inspectors. And then there's the not good, thorough, the not so good inspectors who aren't thorough, and they'll tell you that the other one is, doing too much, or they have some, there's it's just, and I'm sure you see this more than anybody, Emily, but it's you can't get a straight, nobody, I don't know how I'm trying to say. It's just difficult to get any of the bad inspectors admit that the good inspectors are actually good, because then that automatically tells you that they're not doing enough,
Yeah, I actually had this, I'll tell the story in a second. But it's hard to get basically the inspector and sometimes the remediator to agree sometimes, unless sometimes, and I'm not going to say, well, this happens a lot, but, remediation contractors pay inspectors to refer them. So there's that conflict of interest.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's a big problem in the industry, which is why we have a no, referral policy with our company. We will not refer any remediation contractor. So that way our clients understand when we go out there and we say you have mold, there's no reason for us to say it unless there's actually mold there than to, refer to my buddy to come in and I make more money because he's going to pay me. The reason why I asked that question to you, Megan, is because I've talked to, other people that kind of do what you do, and they've gotten pushback from inspectors, right? And other inspectors are like, you don't need them, you have me, right? And honestly, I am so grateful for third-party people that are out there helping, guiding people, because if you're a good inspector, that's not going to bother you if somebody is looking over your work and, because they have questions, then you can help them by answering their questions and see if, you need to grow or learn something that, maybe you missed or you didn't do, or they're going to learn something and get better. And then they're going to help people, more so because now they've learned something new.
Yeah.
So
I see it kind of like we use public adjusters sometimes in insurance, right? I mean, having an impartial or person advocating for the client is advantageous,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that honestly, good inspectors wouldn't have a problem with having somebody like you helping those clients, because honestly, you help us by answering their questions, and now we don't have to answer their questions, right? We did the report, and so instead of them calling me and and me going over everything for 30 minutes, they can call their guy, right?
Yeah.
And it's me. So I asked that question because I've heard other inspectors kind of saying you don't need them, and honestly, I think it's a great thing when people have a third party helping them.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I think it's a great thing, and I also think it's a great way to vet who you want to work with. Because if your inspector or your remediation company gives you pushback for using a guide, then they are not supportive of the trust and verify model, which I advocate for 100% in everything. I want to work with people who I trust, but I want to trust them because they allow me to verify and they want me to verify. And any company that doesn't want that is just trying to, they're, I don't know, maybe they're not all bad. Maybe they just don't want to deal with another person, but I would not work with a company who didn't fully support me getting my outside verification.
Yep. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, yes, I think it is another good vetting tactic. How do you feel about, liaising with my consultant? Because again, like we've touched on multiple times here, people are just overwhelmed. They're forgetful. They're dealing with brain fog and things. I mean, there are things that I've caught where I've like, oh, we've talked about a leak that I'm not seeing, again, investigated on this report, or that you may have neglected to tell your inspector about. So they don't know about it, and therefore they don't know to inspect it, which has saved and found things, So having this extra oversight, especially in the times where the stress is so high and you could be forgetting or neglecting things, across all of these people who are coming through your homes, again, it just can be really beneficial.
Yeah, I completely agree. The story I was going to say earlier was this mom who unfortunately, was in a bad position with her husband who wasn't affected. She had an inspector out who did air sampling. Obviously, nothing came back, and the husband was like, "You're crazy. Like, there's no mold here." She's like, "No, there is. I want to leave." And so she found us and she hired us to go out there. And we found a lot of mold, right? And so the husband then was like, no, there's not, no, we're getting another opinion now, right? So he hired an inspector that he found to go out there. And the mom called me afterwards and she said the inspector walked in and he was like, "Yeah, I heard TMI, they find a lot of mold, and he starts looking, at a few areas. He's like, yeah, you have like mold here, but I don't see mold we're on all these other areas. And she's like, well, you didn't even look, And she's like, why don't you go look inside the plenum? You didn't even look inside the plenum box where they're saying there's tons of mold. And so she actually went up there and forced him to look inside to verify every area that we found mold. And she walked him through the house and had him verify every area. And then she called me and she's like, yeah, now I just told him to leave, because you want to do a lot of air samples. So,
I mean, another good, and that ties into something that I see commonly too, is just the utter denial of people in this space, who just mold is the last thing they are willing to pursue in terms of figuring it out, and putting the pieces together of usually why people are sick in the home. They're willing to say it's due to aging, or they have young kids, or the million other things that we're told can cause stress, or graying hair, or hair falling out, or all of these things. And it is such an interesting phenomenon to witness. Often clients will ask me, because the majority of my clients are women, if their husbands can sit in. And because they want somebody to validate them, and for their husbands to be able to ask questions. And it's wild how people just really, really do not want to go there, even in the face of unimpeachable testing. So
I've had people ask me if they can have my husband talk to their husband. Just because they're like, I need another, I don't know why, but like a man needs to validate it to a man for some reason. Like they don't want to hear from another, I don't know what they think about women, or why they think that we're not telling the truth. But it's like, she's like, well, your husband was on board too. Can you get your husband to talk to my husband? And I've told him, I've offered him up. I'm like, hey, you might need to talk to some random guy who doesn't believe in mold. And he's like, Christina, I literally think, I mean, it's like whatever it takes, because it's not something that we grew up knowing was a problem, and I think a lot of times when you have a different dynamic when the male is the breadwinner, and when he is attached to the physical things that are in the home, because maybe they feel like they provided that, and that's part of who they are as a provider. I think that it can be really hard, especially when they're not feeling anything themselves. So I mean, it's certainly, I don't think it's just like outright denial and the fact that like they don't see it. I think they don't want to see it, because they're going to lose so much of what is very important to them.
Sure.
And it's like it's more than just coming at them with data. I think sometimes there needs to be some acknowledgement for the fact that like men have feelings too. They have feelings, they have emotion, they have an identity, and sometimes you have to attack it from that angle, with that level of acknowledgement. But it does certainly lend itself to a lot of resentment on the person who's actually affected side. It's like, do you or do you not love me? Do you or do you not want me to have a quality of life? And what about our children? And so, yeah, that's probably a whole topic for another episode.
It is, and that's a great one. I mean, yeah, there are so many rabbit holes to go down there. But I digress.
Yeah. Well, I meant to tell you congratulations. We've talked about your wedding a couple of times, but I know it was pretty recent. So
thank you so much. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
that's so
Megan.
Thank you. Yeah. And again, getting there was, and I say this to others who, are going through this, getting there was iffy, but, we did. And, we had to work on it, and we had to work on repairing, the damage that came from the fallout of this journey. And if you have a good partner who's willing to do that and, put that effort in, then I think that's a really good sign. People ask, well, will it ever get better? Should I stay? Should I go? And again, I can't necessarily answer those questions. I'm not qualified to answer those questions. But if you have somebody who's at least willing to, again, make efforts to understand, I think that's a really good sign. And I think that there's hope there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I like, and I know we're kind of out of time, but I love the message of hope that you keep bringing everything back to, because for anybody listening, there is absolutely hope. There's always hope. You're in a particular part of the journey, maybe that is difficult, but through every single person that you maybe hear on Malachi's Message podcast or other podcasts, a lot of times these people are talking about hope. They're talking about where they have been. They've been in a similar situation that you were in, and that now they're not in that situation, whether that's because they have more information and they're not so scared, or because they have more information, they've been able to action it. They've been able to see gains health-wise, in their family and themselves. I've said this before, but I believe it's so important to share these stories, because the journey that you're living is absolutely the prophecy. Your testimony is the prophecy for what can and will happen if you just accept this new reality and then action what you need to action, but hope is key. So I love that message that you keep bringing it back to.
Thank you.
I do too, Megan. Because I don't need to say it again, but I will. Hope is literally everything. Like, if you lose it, then you stop trying.
Yeah.
For a lot of people that go through mold, the situation, a lot of them get out of mold, go right back into mold, and it's like a compounding effect. And it's like, when is this ever going to be over? And what you say to yourself is so important. How you talk to yourself is so important. Never lose hope, because you can get better. You can get the things back that you lost. You can replace items. You can get a different job. The most important thing is getting your health better, at the end of the day. And so, Megan, I'm so glad.
Your health, you don't have anything,
No. Doesn't matter how much money you have if you can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Yep.
So, Megan, it was seriously a joy and a pleasure and honor for you to come on and tell us a little bit more about you. I'd love to have you back on and talk more about, more stuff about what you do and through Guided Well, like some of the other services I saw, mycotoxin testing and so forth. So I know we're kind of out of time, but can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. So right now I am just on Instagram at the Guided Well. And then if you are interested in reaching out, I have my work email, which is theguidedwell@gmail.com. I'm working on a website. A lot of people seem to want it. But I started this venture in July, and honestly, the amount of people who again need this help has been so great that I haven't even had time to do all the things that I wanted to do, like create a website. So that's coming. Stay tuned for that. And yeah, I would love to come back and talk more.